My name is Liza Bernstein. Our panel here is called Death and Bereavement in the Digital Age, and it's a panel. We don't have slides. We're not going to do a presentation. I have the most amazing group of people here with me today. One person who contributed, unfortunately, wasn't able to make it out, Jim Rosenberg. So shout out to Jim. I convened this panel because I've known loss ever since I was a small child, and it was never something that was addressed in a healthy way. I didn't know that. And it's only once I really began to become involved in digital media and social media that I started to actually learn about other ways of dealing with death and bereavement. And then a dear friend of mine, the artist and smiling woman over here. It's okay. Just leave it. This is a panel of friends. A dear friend of mine, and I'm going to let her tell you the story. A dear friend of mine went through a thing, and I found out about it on Facebook, and that was the catalyst for this panel. So I'm going to say my panelists' names, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you in their beautiful voices. So right next to me is Alexis Roberts Kiner. I just sent out a tweet, by the way, so if you want to find all of our Twitter handles, just look on the MEDX hashtag, and you'll get all of them. Next to Alexis is Liz Salmi, and next to Liz Salmi is Michael Fratkin, that one over there. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic along. Each person is going to introduce themselves and tell us their story of why they're here today, and then we'll go from there. I have a few questions, and then we'll all have a discussion.
Okay. Hello, my name is Alexis Roberts Kiner. In 2012, after a relatively short and relatively normal day at work, I received a text saying there was a 911 emergency. And that text came from my children's daycare. And my son had died that day during daycare during an otherwise normal day. My 4-year-old daughter was there. It was the day after her birthday. So, when my husband and I, because we both had the responsibility of raising a small child in grief, we had to choose very quickly what kind of bereaved family we were going to be. And those conversations between my husband and I started in the ER. And they were things like, I need us to have a memorial service. Me too. It was also, I need there to be a bouncy house at this thing because we're going to need to bounce it out because this is a lot of stress. And it was, there should be a craft table. We should be sure the children are invited. We have to include our 4-year-old in mourning the death of her son. So I had this overwhelming feeling, and I'm really lucky in a lot of ways because I was raised with some really incredible role models in death and grief and bereavement. I happen to be born and raised in Alaska, where I like to say Alaska is a very easy place to die. People fall out of the sky in airplanes, people fall down crevasses, people fall off mountains. Those are 3 examples of 3 people I know and cared about. And I could go on, ships sink, etc. So, anyway, we had this responsibility immediately to a practice I like to call wake up and make coffee. It was grief, particularly in the death of a child, is so paralyzing and so difficult. What you have to do, for me, what I needed to do was put my day into teeny tiny checklists. And I'll tell you, I'm 5 years out and there are still days where this is what I have to do. So I wake up and I make coffee. Or sometimes my husband wakes up first and he makes coffee, and that's great. But those are the first 2 steps is wake up, get out of bed. So, you know, in all candidness, like, what the fuck are we supposed to do? So my older girl had really difficult allergies. If you ever want to talk to me about little kid allergies, I can talk a lot about that. If I had looked at my two children the morning of August 14th and told you who was most vulnerable, it would not have been my 9-week-old son. I would have said it was my daughter who was struggling with food allergies we couldn't quite sort out. She was the one we were worried about at every turn. So we posted on Facebook, of all places, the place where you share cat videos and political rants and everything else. Our son has unexpectedly died. So the process quickly began. Well, okay, so we meet with the coroner, we meet with the Los Angeles Police Department, we're meeting with the governing body of this, that, and the other. We have friends step in. One of our friends walked through our door and said, "You may not be Jewish, but I am, and this is how we do things." And I stepped out of the way and said, "If you want to clean my kitchen, I am not going to stand in your way." Our community showed up for us in the most incredible way. We did not eat a meal alone for the first 6 weeks. We like, our pediatrician literally threw off her lab coat halfway through her day, ran to the hospital and said, "Oh God, what happened?" And she sat with us in the ER and sat with my daughter in the ER because children aren't allowed back in the waiting area. So how I use social media in this process was when meeting with the funeral advisor at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, who I cannot go on and on about how lovely they were. He said, "What are we going to do?" And we told him, "We're going to cremate our son and we want to be there." And he said, great. And he showed us sort of funerary boxes and coffins, et cetera, they had available. And I was like, "Listen, that's not like, with all due respect, like, that's not going to work." So he was like, "We also have just a cardboard box." I said, "Oh, that's fine." And he was like, "I have to warn you that being present for the cremation of a child put in a cardboard box is really difficult for families." And I said, "Well, give it to me ahead of time. Is it okay if I paint it?" So this became my first expression of sort of art and grief. The box was delivered, and I began the process over about 32 hours of painting the box inside and out. And this was very important for me. It was very important for my process as a grieving mother. It was very important for me as a mother. I had this overwhelming feeling of, I cared for this child in life, I will care for this child in death, and this is what I'm going to do. So the box was one of the first expressions of my grief we posted on social media. And it had images. My son's name was Erling Monroe, Monroe after Monroe Leaf, the author of Ferdinand the Bull. And so there was an image of Ferdinand the Bull with our family beneath it. Inside the box was an image of his bassinet. Outside, images of my daughter holding her little brother. Posting that on Facebook, having hundreds of people from Denver to Alaska to Washington, D.C., to our friends who are living internationally, reach back and say, "Yes, I see you." And what I have come to realize is, by reaching out on social media, the heaviness of grief is so immense, like always, whether it's a spouse or a child, but particularly something as baffling as the death of a child, that grief is so immense that when others grieve with you, they help hold up the weight. We had a memorial for him. It was Emmy's weekend, like it is now. I live in Los Angeles. That's a busy time. I'm a hairdresser. It's a busy time. But we had his memorial that Emmy's weekend. We had a bouncy house. We had a craft table. We read stories. There were 250 people or more that showed up. I honestly can't tell you. We had a huge potluck. It was a wonderful celebration. It was for us as a couple. It was for my daughter. All she remembers about it is the brownies, which is exactly what she should remember because it was for her. 6 weeks after the death of my son, the HMS Bounty, a tall ship on the East Coast, left the harbor on the East Coast during Hurricane Sandy. And in the hurricane, the ship sank and 2 mariners died, the captain of that ship and a mariner named Claudine Christian, who happened to be one of my sister's best friends from high school. Upon hearing this news, Claudine was like bee's knees as far as like I was concerned, an older sister figure. I reached out to her mother on Facebook and I said, hey, Dina, I know there's a huge difference between the death of a 42-year-old woman in the middle of a hurricane on a tall ship and the difference in the death of a 9-week-old baby boy. But I want you to know that I see you and I hear you and I'm here. She reached back. I had reached out to another friend years before on Facebook when I had found out that her son had died, and I got a letter that same week from her saying, like, yeah, when my kid died, it was awful, and these are the things that helped. And so that is a practice I have continued over the last 5 years, almost exclusively through Facebook. So I've reached out about my grief through Facebook, and one of the things that I've done is I will write letters to my friends who are recently bereaved. The difference between my network in grief and a lot of other people's networks in grief, because we can talk about like actual grief groups I went to that were like hilarious and a horrible fit for my family. But the grief network that works for me is actually not people, it's knowing that I have other people in my life who have had the death of a child or a grandchild and may have the practice of waking up and making coffee and being resilient and sharing their stories. Knowing that I have that group. And then over the last 5 years, I've assembled a motley crew of women whose children have died, who were friends of my friend network before my son died, whose children have died since my son. Upon telling one of my more reverent clients about this grief group I went to that was not a good fit for my family, I was like, I don't know, it's just this place we go and everybody there, the only thing we have in common is dead babies. And he looks at me, he was like, wait a second, it's like an actual place? And I said, yeah, it's like a place you go with dead babies. Like everyone talks about their dead babies. It doesn't work. And he's like, so wait, there's like a dead baby club? I was like, yeah, it's like dead baby club. So after finding out, I started reaching out to these other women. He's like, oh, so now you're like the president of Dead Baby Club? So that is my very iconoclastic and like a really rough around the edges kind of punk rock way I will describe myself. Also in the last 5 years, things that have happened often, and then I will pass the microphone, is this is how the conversation starts. Be at a picnic. Sometimes I'll be at work and it'll be a client, and it'll be like, hey, can I ask you a really personal question? Or a text like, hey, can we talk? Not right now, but when you have time. I mean, if you have time, just call me if you can. And it's like, oh, what do we got? I was like, and it's always like, we got a dead baby. And people are like, yeah, all right. And it's almost always friend of the bereaved being like, what do I do? What do I do? So I have a short list of questions I ask those people who come to me. And the number one thing I say is you go. You just go. You go to their house. If they need space, they will tell you. They will not tell you they need you to come. They will not tell you they need your help, but they will tell you to leave. That's general advice. So obviously it's not going to work for everybody, but that is what I say to people. I have a blessing and a curse. I have a private salon, so it's me and 100 square feet and one client. That leaves it leaves room for intimate conversations, which can be great and can also be not so great. When you're recently bereaved and you don't want to talk to anybody and you're in a situation in order to make your living, you have to walk into a room with someone who may or may not have the most, be socially in tune. But one of the best things about that is it has flipped, for one of my clients, it flipped the, what they call sort of the hierarchy of medicine. Here's my client who happens to be a pediatrician whose hair I make gorgeous 2 or 3 times a year, and she's sitting in my chair and she makes the face and she goes, can I ask you something really personal? And I was like, yeah, go ahead. And I was like, oh. I was like, is there, and she's like, so there's a family in my practice. And I was like, All right, talk to me. And she said, what do I do? What do I do? Really similar situation to yours, but a little bit different. And I said, okay, well, you go. You leave here right now, and I know we're in Beverly Hills, and that's Valencia, and that's an hour and a half away, and I don't care. You get out of this chair, and you drive, and you go, and you sit with the family. She and I had multiple conversations after that. And you had to finish her haircut. I did finish her haircut. It may have been toward the ends of her haircut. That's usually, generally, even when people have said things to me where I'm like, what did you just say to me? I usually finish the haircut, typically. So, yeah. So so anyway, the course of the next few days, she and I had many, many conversations about how they could possibly support this family. And when applying to the Emerging Leaders Program for Medicine X, I followed up with her and I said, hey, did you use any of that? And she said, oh, yeah. She's like, the advice you gave me led to the changing of the protocol for our entire doctor's office and how we handle newly bereaved families, which is you take off your jacket and you go. So, what they found, their outcomes, because healthcare, we like to talk about outcomes, apparently, and the outcome of my family, we had another child almost a year. My husband and I had a conversation shortly after the death of our son, which was like, well, it's not going to get any easier for us to conceive, and it's always going to be super hard to have another kid, and we're going to be crazy, so we might as well go for it now. And so we did. So our third child is now 4. Depending on who I talk to and when I'm asked, the toughest question most bereaved parents get is, how many kids do you have? And women ask this question all the time because it's our baseline for communication. So, oh, do you have kids? Oh, no. Oh, okay. Oh, do you have kids? Oh, how many kids do you have? Or if you're pregnant, oh my God, is this your first? And I'd say, no, it's my 3rd. And people, oh, how old are your other children? And I'd say, oh, 4 and dead. Can I have my receipt, please? Because this is the life of a bereaved woman. So, but answering that question is always hard. If there's any bereaved parents or any, that's one of those things that is tough. How many kids do you have? So, but the doctor, my client found that the family that they helped, through the help that the doctors gave in a social supporting way, that family, A, stayed with their practice, and B, had more children afterwards. It's a very caring way to deal with bereaved family. So that is a snippet of my story. Thank you. Oh, you have one. Oh,
He has one. Actually, Liz, right before you start, the Facebook post, I live in LA, I'd moved to Denver. I didn't go on Facebook much. Something told me go on Facebook. It had been maybe 6 months to a year. I went on. The first thing I saw was Alexis's announcement. And that enabled me, I wasn't able to travel at the time, but to feel close to Alexis and to be a part of that community. That's one of the reasons why I wanted her to talk today. Now, Liz and I share some experiences in common, and I want you to hear from her about what it's like to be part of a community where people die all the time.
Okay, let's just deal with it. All right. Here we go. Testing. Wow. So I'll just say that. So how many of you here are on Facebook? Okay, hands down. How many of you have accepted a friend request from somebody you've never met in real life? All right. Twitter? Okay. How many of you are following people you've never met in real life before? All of us, of course. And then people, and then how many of you have actually met the people that you didn't know in real life, but then you met them later because you were hanging out with them on the thing? Okay. All right. Well, I have a lot of friends on the internet that I've never met in real life, and that send me a friend request. And my mom told me to not talk to strangers, but I have ignored this rule, and it's now something I'm struggling to figure out how to deal with. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Liz Salmi, at the Liz Army on Twitter, promoting myself. No. So in July 2008, a week after my 29th birthday, I had a grand mal seizure. I landed in the ER, and a scan showed I had a mass in my brain. And after a 9-hour brain surgery, I learned I have a gamethocytic astrocytoma, which is a slow-growing but malignant brain tumor. So I have brain cancer. This cancer is slow-growing, but it has a 5-year survival rate of about 34%. And spoiler alert, I am still alive. Yeah, lucky. Oh, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. I just did what the doctor said. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I can totally confirm that. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Fratkin. Yeah, and 6 months after that first brain surgery, my tumor grew back, and that sent me into a whirlwind of treatments over the next 2 years. I had to relearn how to walk and balance, struggled with seizures, and went through 24 months of chemotherapy. There's no right way to respond to a cancer diagnosis. But my way was to respond with curiosity. And because my background is in digital communications, I immediately started blogging about this. So I set up a website, started blogging. And mainly I was just trying to translate a complicated diagnosis to a lay audience of my family and my friends. But because of the way the internet works, over the following weeks and then months and now years, my blog began picking up followers. And now I get like 30,000 unique visits each year, so that makes me feel cool as a nerd. But because stuff is out on the internet and people search the internet when they get diagnosed with something crazy, they find information. And I knew as a newly diagnosed person, I was trying to find other patients and their stories. And I may have stumbled across the blog. And when I'd find that blog, I'd say, oh, when was their last post? And it may have been 3 years earlier, and I wondered, what happened to that person if they stopped blogging? Did they get bored? Did they die? So I always made it part of my goal was I was going to keep blogging no matter what through the end. And even if I was healthy, like I'm doing pretty well today, I would still write just so people knew that I was still alive. Well, people started reading the blog, and at first I was getting lots of comments in the comment section, and this was 2008 when I started, but then more and more people would find me through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and request to be my friend or tweet at me or something like that. And I would get advice, or people would ask me questions for treatment, and I was like, I'm not a doctor. All I can tell you is my story of what I've done, and I have a different diagnosis than you, so don't treat it the same way. But we had shared experiences. What is it like to have neurosurgery? That's crazy. How did you deal with constipation, side effects from treatment? Oh, I could tell you what I did. Hey, all right. It's rocking this. Constipation. No, I think I said that. Over the years, I have been contacted by a variety of people, all living with brain cancer. Not everyone was lucky to be diagnosed with a slower growing brain cancer. There are a lot of people diagnosed, actually more people diagnosed with grade 4, which is glioblastoma. Most people with treatment may live up to 16 months. I've become friends with so many people with brain cancer that I refer to them as like my brain cancer friends. I have my real life friends, I have my work friends, and then I have my brain cancer friends. And only they know what it's like to go through what I've gone through. But having a group of friends like that is hard because in time, my friends die. Some of these people, many of these people I've never met in real life, and we get together on tweet chats. Some of you may be familiar with the breast cancer social media community. It's hashtag BCSM. Well, the brain tumor community has a similar thing. It's BTSM. So these are people I tweet with daily on how they're doing. And they're posting status updates of where they're at in their treatment, photographs of after surgery, during radiation, even near the end of life when they're on steroids or they're in bed. And some people I do meet in real life. And when they die, I feel like, okay, these are people I actually know. I've seen them, I've hung out with them. And then there are friends who die that I've only tweeted with a lot, or maybe we've turned into a text message relationship. And then there are friends I know from the BTSM, brain tumor social media community, that I've only tweeted with in tweet chats. And then eventually one day they disappear. And me and my other brain cancer friends get together and we're like, when was the last time you heard from Rob? I knew he was on Avastin, and then he stopped taking treatment, and he was on steroids, and we start playing this kind of detective game of who died, and when did they die, and when was their last post? And we start going on this investigatory path of, well, let's go check his Instagram. Well, his last post was at Comic-Con, and that was X amount of weeks ago, and he hasn't posted since then. Well, who commented on that post? And what did they say? And was that a family member? And so it kind of turns into this like patient stalking, friend stalking, because if we didn't know that person's family member, or if we were only friends with them on Twitter and Instagram, but not on Facebook, because on Facebook, if somebody dies, you kind of find out instantly, and your feed just gets full. We just end up kind of running around saying, how can we find out if this person died or are they still alive? And we try to confirm deaths and then honor those people in our communities. So where I'm at is I surround myself with people, well, all of us will die. Spoiler alert again for all of you. But I surround myself with people who are more likely to die from their disease sooner than some other healthier people. And I'm trying to figure out how do I deal with the death of people who are on a sliding scale from really good friends to almost strangers. And as more of us develop relationships with people and friendships that we will know online only, as we are able to Skype, work globally, even just with colleagues that you may never meet, I wonder how we will learn to cope with these things moving forward in the future. So that's my story.
Before we transition to Michael, a few notes. So I'm a member of the BCSM community, as many of you know. And very soon, right off the bat, we lost two people who somehow both died the same day, on a Monday, the day of the regularly scheduled BCSM chat. And that was in February 2012. The chat had begun in July of 2011. And since then, we have come together on Monday nights to collectively mourn. We didn't know what we were doing. We just did it. We just came together and held, in a sense, a wake, and were able to address the grief, for better or for worse, some of us having never met the other people, just like Liz is talking about, but you form really close relationships with people. So digital media is allowing us to both do what some do in real life, and do it online, and then back and forth, and so on and so forth, where in the end, sometimes the differentiation between social media and IRL is gone. And speaking of technology and IRL, Dr. Michael Fratkin over here has created a great organization called Resolution Care, and I'm going to let him tell us all about what he does and why.
IRL is in real life, in case, because it took me a minute. I'm new to Twitter.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Michael Fratkin, Dr. Fratkin. It's an interesting panel for me. How many people here are physicians? No, they're physicians. All right.
Is there a doctor in the house?
It's yay! Stand up. No, you don't have to stand up. Nice to have you here. Have you ever noticed how when you're taking care of somebody and then they die, in the frame of reference of a physician, they're just gone, right? I always felt, I'm a hospice and palliative care doctor, and the training that I received was basically to make sure that there is somebody who knows something about grief and bereavement available to me. That's somebody else's job. People disappeared into the blackness, even as a, very kind and compassionate and human-centered hospice doctor. They just disappeared. And over these last 11 years or so, I figure I've taken care of about 2,000 people who've died in a small town, and they don't disappear for me anymore, in part because of my relationship with the community, in part because it's a small town. So even my daughter has a sort of mental map of where all the ghosts in town are in real life, IRL. We'll drive down this, and she said, isn't there somebody that you took care of there and there and there and there? And that's how it feels to me. That's how it feels to me with all the relationships of the people that left. I am integrated into a small community. But mostly, death is an inky black mystery to me. And social media has been very important to the work that I've been doing in creating resolution care, but it's also woven me more intimately into the community relationships that the people that I care for and those that love them exist in. So they exist there for me in a way, and I'm in contact with them. So it's an interesting place for me to be because I feel not at all expert, not at all. I feel like I come to this panel as a very inspired observer, and a doctor in the house for reference. So there's that.
Thank you, Michael. Can I tell a little personal story? Yeah. So I hear you, but I raise you. I raise you to, at the very least, participant. Recently, a dear family friend's mom was very, very sick and was in hospice care at home. And there was a huge disconnect. A nurse was coming once a week to take vitals, or maybe twice a week. My friend's mom, Anne, was not happy. She wanted to die. She knew she had a very advanced cancer, and she had never wanted to take medication. She had celiac disease. She was a fierce patient advocate for celiac disease once she became diagnosed. And I was starting to be really frustrated for this beloved family because as a activated, engaged patient, I was seeing this huge disconnect. Like, wait, you're in hospice at home, but there's no palliative care doctor. When have you met with the doctor? Do you know the doctor's name? Nothing. So after a while, I asked my friend permission for me to talk to somebody I happen to know, Michael Fratkin over here, who through the Twitter and the Medicine X. And part of what Michael does is he meets with patients in their homes, but he also meets with patients in their homes with Zoom, through video conferencing. So what we were able to do, Michael and I spoke, and we convened a Zoom meeting with Michael in Northern California, myself in LA, my friend, her brother, and one of their caregivers in Texas. And all three of them were huddled on a bed so they could get in the frame. And we had this amazing conversation where Michael talked about what he knows and what he knows how to do. And based on that conversation and the questions that my friends were able to ask, they were able to do two things. One, talk to Anne in a way that they wouldn't have necessarily have thought of doing if Michael hadn't given some avuncular, that's the word for uncle, avuncular advice or suggestions, shall we say, hashtag. Um, and then that inspired them to go and advocate with the palliative care company to see if they could meet with the palliative care doctor who was apparently assigned to Anne's case. That doctor came to the house. Apparently, my friend wrote to Michael that they would have been very much in sync, and they were able to have a conversation that helped Anne at least become comfortable with certain things that maybe she wasn't comfortable with before. But at the end of the day, once again, we've got technology with humans using technology in new ways. And I saw that, I think it was on Facebook, you posted that, oh, I'm just a country doctor. And I was having a discussion earlier today about, well, the country doctor is actually what we all need. That, not necessarily the paternalistic one, but the person who is a part of your community and a part of your life, where you actually know each other and are able to have these conversations with each other. So I see you as much more than an observer, my friend. Does anybody have any questions? False modesty. Did everyone hear the question? Concerns about using video technology and HIPAA?
Without taking too big a turn into palliative care via telemedicine, I don't worry about anything. I can't even spell HIPAA. I don't know what it stands for. I know it's a pain in my ass, and it freaks out all of the administrative people, legal people, and people around me. So I used to use it. I use it with my teammates, like just because it's so quick and it's right there. FaceTime. But we use Zoom, which is a HIPAA-compliant, cloud-based, encrypted. It's about encrypting the signal as it goes up and encrypting it as it goes down. It's about consenting somehow or another. Some people say FaceTime is. Other people say it isn't HIPAA-compliant. Honestly, I couldn't give a shit about it because what it is a channel for communication and connection, a much-needed, very efficient, at your fingertips way to add to the dimension of a telephonic conversation, this synchronous connection. I mean, we're sitting all the way across the room from each other, and we are connecting in this communication. So we use Zoom, is the short answer to that. Yeah. The technology and the legalities of things is nuanced and complex and everything else, but the truth of the matter is it's very easy. It is HIPAA compliant. There's been no cases of precedent concerning it. There's no document unless it's recorded. So it's an evanescent, encrypted signal out in the noosphere and disappears like smoke. I just want to say something about shining light. What social media is doing, what Medicine X is doing, is shining light. I couldn't imagine 15 years ago a full room of enthusiastic and excited individuals at any kind of a healthcare conference willing to kind of peel this back and take a look at this. We are confronted in our society by our own misogyny, racism, hatred. Currently, it's just unmasked. We talked about the accelerating pace in another session of revolutionary change for the LGBTQ community. It's because the youth of this generation have been willing to come out. Therefore, the old, stupid ways couldn't hold. So we're talking about death and dying in a new and different way. A young woman with a brain tumor in Portland named Brittany Maynard, whose face was remembered in the little remembrance thing. For, I think, 8 or 9 years, a bunch of passionate individuals thought that that was a really important thing for our society to do and got nowhere with the California state legislature. But within 10 months, there was a signed law on the governor's desk because this young woman decided to be an activist proactively in the last 6 or 8 weeks of her life. Amazing. Whatever your view is about that particular bit of service that people can provide to each other. So shining light is what's the only thing I can imagine that's going to help us through these difficult times that we're in right now. There's a willingness to actually just talk straight about dead babies and brain cancer and the talk. You can mention it if you want. All of these things. Shining light just seems like we can do that. We can talk about what's real and true and so about life with each other, recognizing ourselves in each other, but also the unique individual others that are there. We can do that.
Saying is, so in the first 3 months, there's always a lot of support. There's always a lot of visibility. Someone recently asked me if I thought in my personal experience, if 5 years was long enough time for someone to get over a death. Now, this being said, no, but listen, we all put our, like, and so I said, no. I was like, my son died 5 years ago and I'm not over it. And I was like, should I be? And I am lucky because he caught me in a second where I was able to be that outward and be like, no, dude, like, no. Because, and I'm, so, Facebook is valuable because is everyone familiar with that graph of concentric circles of, so the person with cancer or the person at the center of the tragedy is in the middle, and then there's like concentric circles outside. And so person in the middle is the person who the tragedy happened to. Next circle is family, friends, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have a problem with what's going on with the person in the center, you have to go to someone whose circle is larger. You can't go in. You've got to seek help outward. What Facebook allows is for the person who is at the center to talk to all of the outward concentric circles in a very public way, which means, so my friend whose son recently died is able to say in her grief, is able to stand up and say, virtually stand up and say, today was really hard. Today was really hard. I really miss my son. I really feel the loss of losing a twin. And I'm thinking about him, so go home and hug your loved ones. And so there are people who don't reach back out on Facebook, where it does get it gets fatiguing, and it's too much. It's too much to see, particularly my experience, parents who've survived the death of an older child. The opening Facebook on anniversaries and seeing all the pictures of their children being happy, and then seeing all the pictures of the friends who have aged is hard. In my book club, my husband and I are in a book club because getting together once a month to drink is not socially acceptable. So we joined a book club with all of our friends. And my older girl was the only child in the book club for years. And then in the course of 16 months, there were 5 children born. And my son was one of those 5 kids. So any interaction with that book club and the families in our book club, there are 4 other children that are within a 6-month span of my son. And seeing all those kids grow as a parent is really difficult. But sisters, friend, yeah. And I totally. And for the first few years in bereavement, the thing that I found is I could see like a little kid on the side. Like my husband played soccer and we went and watched, and I saw a little boy run up, and I was like, that child is 17 months old. There's no way he's not. And I looked at the mom and I was like, is your son 17 months? She was like, yeah, how'd you guess that? I was like, yeah. He was the exact, like, had my son lived, Exact same. My son would have been 17 months. But this is what I gained from being vocal. So what I gained from being vocal is I go to get my hair washed at the salon where I get my hair cut in LA, and I lay back, and the woman I've known for years who I used to work with said, "Oh, how's it going? How's your new baby?" And I look up, and I'm like, "Blanca, he died." She goes, "Oh, this happened to me, this happened to me." And she proceeds to tell me the story of her son dying 40 years earlier from kidney failure in central Mexico. And she's like, "I went to that grave every day for 6 months, and I thought my eyes were going to fall out. I put so many tears in the ground." And I was like, yes, that is it. That's it. I mean, when I reach out and I open up about the fact that I have 3 children and these are their ages and my son had died, what I get back is other support. It's other bereaved parents coming out. And sometimes it's a trigger and sometimes it sucks for other people, or sometimes people get sad and it's an awkward moment. But if it's what I need, it's totally worth it. So, but sometimes it's not. I have a collection. I brought it. I can show you after the panel. I'm sure we're way over time now, but sorry. But I brought it, and it's a list of, there's a lot of these lists, like what not to say. I'm not really interested in those general lists. I have a little book I put together called What Not to Say that's actually collections of things people have actually said to me. So it's what people have said that they maybe shouldn't have in retrospect. That's the cost. The cost of being open is opening yourself up to people saying, "Oh God, like, well, I mean, how connected could your daughter really have been anyway? I mean, your baby was only 9 weeks." But the other thing that you can get from that is, "Oh my God, how are you? You have to meet my mother. We used to live in rural Texas, and we were driving, she was pregnant, she gave birth in a truck, and her baby did not survive. And they went to the hospital after giving birth in the truck, and she looked at the doctors and was like, I have to go home tonight. If I don't go home tonight, I might lose my husband because he's such a mess about this." And so she did. She went home that day. And then 2 weeks later, the woman who tells me this story brings her mom into the salon so she and I can talk. So suddenly I have this woman who knows, and where it's still hard, and she's 50, and that's okay. And that she wakes up, she makes coffee, she contributes to society. Some of the best advice that I got, and that I think this is, and I mean, I'll hang out and talk about this all day. You want? But listen, some of the best advice I got, and I thought it was really valuable from early in my grief, was someone said to me, "Let it be hard." Because I said, "God, this is so hard." And she said, "Let it be hard. Let it be really fucking hard. And be a mess, and let your friends and your family and your community scoop you up off the floor." We don't have a cultural framework for this. One of I wrote a piece recently about the assembling of grief teams and how medical professionals can be a part of grief teams and what they would look like in a secular society. I am sort of my husband referred to himself actually at my son's memorial as agnostic at best, which was a really nice way of saying that he's a pretty staunch atheist. And so we don't have that cultural or religious framework, and that religious framework and that that does not work for our family. And for me in particular. And so for us, the grief team that was assembled around us was impenetrable and amazing. And so the reason why I've sort of volunteer resources to other people whose friends, children die, then I'm able to say, okay, this is what you can do to help out. And these are the different players you can put into place. And this is where medical professionals have a role in being part of the community, not staying in an office.
So thanks for bringing up survivor guilt, which everyone who's still living with cancer has, and forever.
Isn't has.
Or isn't has. And I know we're wrapping up. How do you deal with it? For me, I think about all of the friends I've had living with any diagnosis, whether it's a brain cancer, breast cancer, and what matters to them. And a friend of mine, Emily, who had a brain cancer and she died, she had her tumors in her occipital lobe, which was handling her vision. And as she was nearing the end of life, she was losing all of her vision. And she created a 2C list, all of the things she never got to see in her life. And she had asked her friends to go out and to see these things in memory and honor of her. And then I have friends who had tumors in areas where they're losing all the ability to move and walk. And so I think about Emily, and she said, whatever you do, put your heart in it and do it better for me. And so whatever I'm doing, whether it be here or working out at the gym or going on a vacation to see something I know Emily would have wanted to see, I try to honor their memory by recognizing how lucky I am to be here.
I like the transition. Survivor guilt. So when I was 4.5, my father died. And when I was 9 years old, I found out, because I found his death certificate, that he had killed himself. And I don't know if I get it through my DNA. I don't know if my brain is wired a certain way. But I've always loved life. But I know when I was little, there was a voice in my head that told me, and it's not like a schizophrenic voice in my head, but it was this thing inside me that said, life is so precious. And I've always loved life, and I don't really frickin' know why. What I can say about survivor guilt, and this is something that I've absolutely, that has been a massive gift to me, being an advocate through Twitter, and like Liz, getting to know so many people and so many of those people dying. I feel that in some ways, or in many ways, I don't have survivor guilt because I am so pissed off. And I feel that I have to be there for them and that I've taken the torch up from them. I feel like we're all in a relay, and that's what keeps me going. But I understand survivor guilt. Believe me, I understand it. It just doesn't work for me, and I guess I'm grateful for that. Another thing I'd like to say, I was recently at a presentation where somebody talked about capital A advocacy. And they said, the only advocacy that matters is capital A advocacy when you go up to Capitol Hill and you talk to legislatures. Okay, sorry. No. What Alexis has described, what Liz has described, even what Michael has described, and the concept of the shining the light, just talking to each other, one quote unquote small conversation, one tweet, one Facebook post, that is advocacy. And then you can turbo it or put it on steroids or whatever, but just never forget that just talking about things can change things.